I've never technically worked with FGM. I came across FGM whilst working on another filming project, and I thought I knew about FGM, but speaking with these professionals who worked in it taught me that I really didn't know much about it at all. I certainly didn't have any appreciation of the values or beliefs that support the practice. I just thought, oh my gosh, this is barbaric, which it is, and that led me to make further research. So my experience with FGM is probably like many people. We hear about it, and you're either moved to the extent that you want to do something, or it just enters your consciousness and it's there forever. I've not worked on a case of FGM. By case of FGM, it's perhaps dealing with a survivor or somebody who's at risk of it. The case that I created was through the narrative of my drama film, Calm. Following the research that I did into FGM, the case was a fictional circumstance based on a true story in which a girl was at risk of FGM and then became an FGM victim, and it led to show how she became a survivor. The reasons behind FGM formed a really valuable and important part of my research. I had the advantage of having people who are already practitioners in the field, amazing women who have been championing the drive to end FGM and who are FGM survivors themselves. It was both interesting and tragic learning the reasons behind the practice. These reasons vary from perceived religious responsibilities. People believe that carrying out FGM is in accordance with their religion, be that Catholic or Muslim or whatever else. But factually, it isn't. It's a custom, a tradition that isn't based in faith. In addition, the belief, and a core belief behind the practice is that women need to be controlled, their sexuality needs to be controlled for the benefit of the man's pride and status. The idea of a woman feeling sexually motivated to anyone, let alone to him, is not accepted, and therefore physically removing the center of a woman's physical sexuality is considered appropriate rather than run the risk of a woman who isn't behaving in a way that society expects. I spoke to some survivors during the research of my film, and I spoke with people that worked with survivors either in a surgical sense, in a clinical sense, enabling safer childbirth, etc., and preventing obstetric complications caused by scar tissue, etc. The most important and poignant experience I've had with survivors is screening my film to a room full of survivors at a film festival. And it's screened alongside Layla Hussein's film, The Cruel Cut, directed by Vicky Cooper. So in the room are people who are engaged in the topic or are survivors of FGM. And that experience for me was when I truly let the film go, because I finally was satisfied that it was well researched and it worked. Because if it didn't work or reflect the lives of actual survivors, then I'm just a tourist making a film because, oh, there's this issue that came up. But I'm pleased that the horror of FGM moved me in the way that it did. So since then, I became more of an activist and found it critically important to educate men and to sort of unpick the cultural knots that are often wrapped around such a difficult issue. I often ask myself the question, how can we live in a society or a world that condones and supports the practice? Because it has to be said that unless you're active in countering the practice, then actually you're condoning it by doing nothing. So the biggest problem in addressing the form of violence is, at its core, women's rights throughout the world, because it's not done to help women, even if many of the beliefs suggest that it is to help the woman to be a better wife, a commodity, if you like, that is purely for the benefit of the man's dignity or status or pride. Why it's important to combat it, or what's the biggest challenge in combating it, is political will, the political risks associated with going against traditions that are deeply held amongst people who have elected you. Modernizing, adapting, evolving with education and understanding of the damage that FGM causes physically and emotionally, and dissipating that understanding to a population that is either educated or uneducated, or who adhere to customs strictly or loosely, who have different levels of respect for women's rights and women's bodies, and cultures where women's voice just simply doesn't matter. They're second-class citizens, and their feelings about such issues are there to be manipulated by men. My view is that, in reality, if men made it abundantly clear that this is not what they wanted or needed or required, that it would stop tomorrow. Why? Because in this world, men get what men want. Therefore, how I've realized I can contribute to this cause is by voicing that fact that men get what men want, and by being passive and silent, we're condoning the continuance of the practice. I never say that I'm a campaigner, although some of the work I do looks like I am. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a film producer and director and writer. And what I chose to do in the making of the film Calm was use that voice, use the skills that I have and the capability that I have to point it towards an issue that's important. And that's it. You know, my work, as I've said before, has benefited greatly from people who are really at the coalface, at the forefront of the issue, and who have devoted their lives to achieving this change. I've devoted my ability to highlight this issue, and in doing so have become sort of embedded in part of the drive to end FGM. I may make future films about FGM. I may make films about other issues that I think require a boost to their voice. In particular, issues around equality, particularly around equality for women. I'm a feminist. I grew up with extremely strong women in my life. And through that lens, I was able to understand the shameful way in which women's rights, needs, and humanity is disrespected. So to have reached an age or a position now where I get to choose a little bit about what I point my attention to, I know that it will be in the direction of an important issue. And so I may find myself talking about other issues as well. I may learn about more issues in the same way as I learned about FGM. But this process of realizing that the reason I have these skills and this capability and I do what I do means that I have a responsibility to point some of that effort at things that matter. If you think of the range of reasons that FGM is carried out, some people think it's religious, others cultural, others it's a custom, others it's a rite of passage into womanhood, it keeps the women calm, prevents them being wayward and potentially leading her to have sex with somebody else, threatens the man's paternity over children. All of those reasons could be addressed independently, but I think you could do all of that simply by acknowledging women's right to exist on this planet in the same way as men do. You know, you can actually empower women, period, across the board. And by empowering women, it doesn't mean disempowering men. It just means understanding that we're just humans on a planet. And there's no way I would live in a world where parts of my genitals were cut off to make my woman feel more comfortable. And yet, here we are in a world where this is happening to millions of women. And, you know, I woke up this morning in my bed, had my coffee, and I don't know how many women have been abused in this way, or children have been abused in this way in those few hours.